And we're live. Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Doing good. How are you, Sean?
Not too bad. So this is actually the first time we've seen each other, quote unquote, in 2020. So you're looking well and none the worse for wear.
As well.
Thanks. Thanks. Well, I want to really thank you for doing this. This is one of the topics I suspect is going to be very popular on the channel when it gets released. And we'll get into that in a second. But first, I want to thank everybody for joining us and checking out Did You Know That? ? This is a video chat series I started to talk to interesting people about interesting things like Aaron. For those of you who don't know, my name is Sean O'Rourke. I'm a cyber liability consultant, which basically means I prepare companies to be hacked. So Aaron, your turn.
Yeah, and Sean, it's been great when I throw him curveballs about companies in crypto preparing to be hacked of their crypto. So yeah, he's a great guy, and I certainly heartily endorse him. Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on here, Sean. And a little bit about me. I'm an attorney. I have a tech background. I had a fairly lengthy career as a data scientist and then tech entrepreneur, and sort of switched over to the dark side to the world of suits to practice law, but it's very much hewing to my past life in computer science and IT. Work with a lot of startups and other tech companies and small businesses, and these days I have a pretty major, not 100%, but most of my practice is focused on blockchain, and so that brings us to what we're going to talk about here today.
Exactly, and we'll get to blockchain in a second. But the reason I wanted you to come on is because you have an expertise in crypto, specifically what is referred to as cryptocurrency, and we'll get into whether or not that's an accurate description of it, of which Bitcoin is the most famous. So for those who may be joining us who have heard Bitcoin, have heard cryptocurrency, but aren't really sure what it exactly is, can you give basically a layman's overview of what it is?
Absolutely. Essentially, cryptocurrency, and this really goes to the whole blockchain world, is a distributed database. It's just a shared ledger system amongst hundreds or thousands of computers, basically in the cloud, and we're all used to cloud now, right?
Sure.
But it is maintained in a way where no one or small number of bad actors can maliciously change the data. So it's held consistently through what's called a consensus algorithm. This is basically a bunch of obscure math in cryptology, and it's used on a continuous basis to keep that ledger in consistent shape so no one can tamper with it. And then it's gradually built with more and more records as the network adds transactions. So what does that have to do with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency per se? Is that the basic kind of entry you can have in these cloud-based distributed ledgers is a unit of value, or a number essentially, which you're treating as a unit of value. And then because you have this ledger system, you can keep from duplicating that value. So it's called the double spend problem. You can't have money if you can, spend something, multiple times, 2 times, right, 3 times. If someone could copy your wallet and spend those same dollars, eventually we would have a pretty big problem, right?
Yeah.
So that's the double spend problem, and essentially the first application of a distributed ledger of this fashion is to prevent that problem from occurring, and then starting from that point, you can add all sorts of other data to it, and then keep that data consistent.
Right.
So it's a little abstract, but it's hard to drill down further without really getting in the weeds.
Right. And because I'm keeping these chats to 30 to 45 minutes and
Exactly.
not 2+ hours or all day, because let's be honest, with the questions that arise that I didn't even put on the list that I sent you, there were probably 20 others that I wanted to go over. So essentially, it's a mathematical way to assign a value to a digital,
You could say an address, or
right,
yeah,
something
so,
digital is given value or is agreed to a value level between two different parties.
I mean, it's not too dissimilar from just our notion of bank accounts now, which are digital,
Right.
but it's in a bank, old school silo system, on a bunch of separate computers, and then they're not connected in any meaningful sense. You can send value from one account to another, goes out of your banking system into another bank in their computers, and then there's a bunch of rules and conventions to try to keep from having double spends and lost money. And sometimes this actually happens because those systems are not they're not cryptographically set up to prevent that. So there was someone sent me a link from a few months ago about balances disappearing and appearing in Chase accounts. So sometimes you see around the edges that these are very different systems, even though they're both digital.
Right. So, and when we're recording this, Citi obviously just lost $900 million because of a clerical error.
I hadn't seen that. Yeah.
Oh,
it's very hard for those to happen with blockchain and cryptos.
Exactly. So
not that there aren't vulnerabilities, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Right. We may get into that because that's a whole other topic of how the keys work and whatnot. But let's again, for viewers who may have heard, may not have heard, what is the difference between cryptocurrency and blockchain? Just so we can get that out of the way, and then we'll focus on the crypto side. Just
to nail that down, I mean, the blockchain is really the system of maintaining that ledger, or you could call it the ledger itself. There's a few flavors. Actually, technically, blockchain isn't the only one, but you can use it as a broad brush. So it's that distributed ledger that's kept consistent across a network of participating computers. And then Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency are these units that can be sent around on that ledger.
Right.
So that's it. That's the distinction.
Yeah, so in very general terms, you can consider the blockchain sort of the foundation, and then Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies are built upon those foundations.
Exactly. And then it goes from there where you can have other
then it gets
artifacts.
Again, we don't have all day, but I would love to do an all-day one on it because it is fascinating the way it's sort of evolved.
We'll touch on them for sure.
Okay. So, and I'm looking at my notes because I have to keep myself confined and I don't want to spray all over the place. So Bitcoin has gotten a good and a bad rep. During the COVID pandemic, it's gotten a bit of a bad rep because that's how all the ransomware hackers want to be paid, is in Bitcoin. So people have a negative connotation with that, but there are legitimate uses for crypto. And they keep expanding every day. So give folks some examples of what the real legitimate legal options for crypto are and what you're seeing out in the marketplace, whether your own clients or just in the world in general.
Yeah, I mean, and I would preface that by saying, some of the press gets beyond the scale of the problem. New York Times had a big article last year on dark web, which is basically criminal uses that can be tied into the Bitcoin network. And their numbers actually only amounted to about 0.8% of the volume, so less than 1% of the Bitcoin activity. And then if you compare that to something more traditional for a basis of reference, in the developed countries, the black market ranges from about 5 to 25%. Which is in, the alternative, which is our normal government currency. So just to provide a bit of perspective for people. That said, we don't want to encourage or allow disfavorable uses to get out of hand.
Right.
But on the clean side, so certainly a major application for cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and others is payments. It is useful to have digital payments and better payment systems, and there's a lot of work going on with that. Bitcoin has gotten notorious as a kind of digital gold, because rather than keeping a small value per coin, it has skyrocketed, being the first, being fairly durable and having stuck around. People want this just as a valuable asset,
Sure.
So people are calling it digital gold, and some are actually treating it that way. So that is a useful role, right? It doesn't do anything by definition, really, but it's useful. But then it certainly goes from there. So there's a variety of use in the investment space. So, for example, something that's coming to the fore are what's called security tokens. And these are basically representations of things like stocks and bonds. These are just being introduced, but there's a lot of work going on with them. My clients and far, far beyond. This is spreading to other digital assets, digital forms of assets. Really, I should say digitized assets. So
Right.
you could, for example, fractionalize ownership in real estate, which many are doing. Even collectibles, cars,
High-end
expensive artwork, high-end
Yeah.
artwork. Yep.
Yep.
So that is going on. I mean, all these things are moving forward in the market. So a variety of different forms of investment, both traditional and non-traditional. And then something else coming to the fore is what's called the DeFi space, or decentralized finance. What this is more of a marketplace concept within the cryptocurrency world, where you can borrow and lend, make margin trades, fund liquidity pools with your own crypto, so that people can make more liquid trades between different cryptocurrencies. The borrowing and lending is probably the more familiar everyday sort of transaction, but
Sure.
it does get pretty sophisticated, and you have some fairly sophisticated traders moving into the space, which again is an application, not one a lot of consumers are going to see or be interested in, but is going on, is set to get probably larger. But I think the borrowing and lending type applications are of significant interest to consumers, particularly when you're starting to see returns in the 5 to 15% range, whereas everybody's stuck with 1-2% in their bank accounts. So it starts to be pretty.
If you're lucky, you get
Exactly.
1%. Yeah.
So that just touches on a few areas, and there's more, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah. So I'm going to move a question up, and you and I have talked about this. I've talked about it extensively. Is currency a misnomer for these, or are they really more assets? And the reason I ask that is because of what you said previously, is that the cost or the price of these digital currencies or tokens fluctuate, where a $5 bill is a $5 bill. That's what it always is. And that's what a lot of people equate to currency. So what is your opinion on this front, given how embedded you are with this industry now?
Yeah, it's a good question. As I touched on, Bitcoin ended up sort of being more of a digital gold than a currency per se, just the way things evolved. So it is kind of seen as a problem in the space. When you want a more currency-like use, like for a payment system, you don't necessarily want the value to skyrocket and then everyone should just hold on and not actually spend that asset. But there's a lot of work going on to solve that problem, and there's been immense progress. There's actually quite a varied field of what's called stable coins now, and these are coins that are backed with a variety of mechanisms and using a variety of methods to retain a stable, sometimes very nearly fixed value. There's, I don't know how closely you track that, but there are a lot of them now. A lot of them are set to try to be pegged to the dollar,
Yep.
the US dollar. So there's like GUSD, BUSD, USDT, USDC. Some of these are actually regulated instruments even. So under New York's regulatory regime, not only do they have what's called the BIT license, which is dedicated to crypto, but they actually have allowed the use of what's called limited purpose trusts. These are companies under the financial regulatory regime, which can hold assets like dollars, for instance, or gold.
Gotcha.
And then they get permission to issue digital embodiments of these, which are essentially go out into the crypto space as stable coins. And so you can see these, listed on Coinbase. And
So a stable coin has a fixed value that they work to keep at a fixed value. So it's
That's
pegged
correct.
to a particular number, and for the most part, it's going to stay at that number for the duration.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, they work different ways depending on which coin it is and what the model is. They can fluctuate in trading a lot like an ETF or closed-end fund. So there's some, arbitrage and market forces going on. But generally, these type of coins, for example, if it's pegged to the dollar, it's going to be, within probably 0.1% to 1% of the 1.0 value, 1-to-1 to a US dollar. So these are become quite popular in the last year or two, and I only see that spreading. And the interesting thing is just the ability of that, or the potential to sort of grease the wheels of digital commerce and digital markets, to be able to put funds in something, a digital asset that you can trade easily, but that asset itself is not going to, to slip in value when you don't want it to.
Right.
So it's a pretty major advance and gaining a lot of ground.
So before I go on to the next one, with whom are they popular? So who is purchasing this? Are these everyday investors, consumers, or are these institutionals, or are these, to your point, the more advanced kind of investors, traders, or what have you? Who's really in the market? Let's say for the stable coins versus currency like Bitcoin.
I do think it is more predominantly pros, institutions, and then basically lay investors that are fairly advanced. The kind of people that would, be pretty active in their own brokerage accounts, and sort of research stocks and things like that. So it is. It's not just limited to pros by any means, and a lot of things in the crypto space are basically motivated and self-taught individuals who are just very interested and excited about the space.
Sure.
But it is in the last year or two, there has been a distinct evolution towards more uptake by professional traders, some of which were crypto specific in the beginning, and then other more conventional trading institutions are starting to move into the crypto space. So all of these instruments and things like the DeFi market are becoming, as day by day, they're being taken up by more in those areas. More and more traditional funds and institutions are getting into them, getting interested. As far as more of like a functional framework for blockchain-based applications, I think we're at the beginnings of seeing things like stable coins used to sort of grease the wheels for consumer-facing applications. But it is starting to happen around, and a lot of those sort of projects are more in the testbed phase or like venture, early stage venture phase.
Gotcha.
But it is coming.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the big bad, which is regulation. and everything is eventually regulated, especially if it involves money. So you've already mentioned New York State. So I have to assume each state is different in how they're handling crypto. But let's start at the very top on how the federal level of regulation is handling it, and then let's move down to the state on that front.
Yeah, I wish I had a unified answer for you, even on the federal, but it's pretty balkanized in the U.S. We don't have the most progressive or proactive or a coherent response to crypto here, and you see the Capitol Hill is not really focused on it for sure.
That's
Um,
especially not now when we're recording
now.
this during a pandemic. Yeah,
exactly, with everything going on. I wish it weren't so, but no, there's not a big thrust to do something coherent federally in this country with crypto. That said, the regulatory agencies like the SEC, the Treasury, the CFTC, and others have moved forward in a piecemeal approach, and then they haven't been consistent as to how accepting or progressive they are themselves. So it's almost well, what happens in legal counsel is, you try to figure out if what someone's doing with crypto is it more like a commodity and therefore falling under commodities regulation? Is it more like a security and therefore presumptively under the SEC? Are they falling under money services business regulation, in which case they'd be under the Treasury and FinCEN? Often it's a mixture of these things. And then on each of those fronts, there have been encouraging and discouraging developments. So, for example, the SEC has been pretty welcoming to crypto as long as you exactly use one of the regulated crowdfunding or even just regular securities issuance exemptions, which is it's not the easiest to mesh a square peg in the round hole in that sense, but they will allow it essentially. But certainly not in a very streamlined way. And then they are not very accepting to something where you don't think it's really a security in a traditional sense, but the SEC is able to make a plausible case it's a security. In that sort of dust up, you're probably going to lose at this point. So one of the
almost assuredly going to lose.
Almost assuredly, there are cases working through the courts, but it's very, very slow. So, yeah, on everybody's wish list in crypto is to get sort of a tailored regime that gives you a space for coins that are not securities, and we can talk more about why that might be. But that's a big active area that's in play. And then others like FinCEN on the money services businesses front, they're fairly strict, but there have been some surprising concessions there. For example, if you run a exchange for cryptocurrencies that has no custody, it just allows direct swapping, then FinCEN basically leaves you alone. You don't have to sign up register as a money services business and do all that compliance. So there have been some bright spots, but generally, if you're approaching the space, you have to assume you're going to be regulated, and then find out exactly how that regulation applies.
So let's take that example that you just used real quick. Is it because that direct transfer is accepting no ownership even for a brief amount of time of the coin? It is simply acting as, let's say, a wormhole from this side of the galaxy to this side of the galaxy, and the crypto is just passing through, and they're going to charge some sort of fee to facilitate that transfer.
That's basically correct. Yeah, I think it's the right analysis that FinCEN went with, but the idea is, if you cut out the middleman in terms of someone taking custody, that could potentially run off with
the coin,
with whatever the asset is, in a traditional sense, but in this case, a coin, or make a horrible mistake, right? Either could happen. If you cut out that piece, then, for the purposes of AML regulation, the government is okay with saying, it's transparent to us, so don't worry about it. If you are exchanging cryptocurrencies as an individual or institution, as a business, you may still fall under the AML regulations. But as far as being an exchange per se, as long as there's no custody in the U.S., it's fairly regulatory transparent. So,
okay. And just for all viewers, AML stands for anti-money laundering.
Correct.
Which is a big deal. I mean,
yeah, I mean that's
mostly for traditional banks, but I mean for anybody handling money.
Yes, exactly, and it's I'd say the securities question and the AML question. These are the two biggest regulatory concerns in crypto, and have been, frankly, the biggest drags on progress. But then again, we don't want there to be rampant fraud, and we don't want there to be, basically payment systems where you can have terrorism financing and the proceeds of crime that are flying around and getting out of control. So, we need to do something. We just many people in the space have wished that there was a more progressive and active involvement by regulators than there has been.
So then briefly on the state side, now you're in New York, and New York obviously is a very heavy finance-based state. But are they the most progressive, or are there other states that are doing things even more forward-thinking than New York is doing when it comes to crypto, or is it really just ad hoc and nobody's doing anything that you would consider forward-thinking?
I don't think New York is the most progressive. In a sense, you could say it is, in that it has put the most regulation out. But I think that it has been on the overly restrictive side. And being a big finance state, I think the first go-to of New York is to put structures in place that would not be an issue for like a big bank or a large financial institution, but maybe are just too much of a burden for a small startup. So that has been a problem. They have, in the sense of providing a regulatory regime, say for doing a crypto-based business or holding custody of cryptocurrency. It has been good that there's something there and there are some answers, but it has been it's fairly inexpensive and top-heavy regime.
Sure.
So it could be better in that sense.
So what states do you think are more liberal when it comes to this area?
Well, Wyoming is an example of a state that's very progressive as comes to crypto, and it's actually happened in an interesting way. They had some of the first sets of laws pertaining to crypto. I think it was 2014 or 2015. And I don't recall on which regulatory front it was mostly. I believe it was probably money transmission, where essentially it was like a complete, the barn door was completely shut. And then some activists went in there, so Caitlin Long is one of the big names, a Wyoming native, big in the financial space, who sort of went back and sort of focused lobbying efforts on the state government there and said, hey, this is crazy. You're stifling up upcoming technology, and this could be very good for Wyoming. They actually managed to turn the ship within a few years and get a series of laws passed in Wyoming that are some of the most progressive. So they did things like, for example, to exempt cryptocurrencies from money transmitter licensing, which is one of the big bugaboos in the space, to provide a digital token regulatory section that is not a security. So you can issue kind of token that's not falling under securities regulations, at least in the state. And then a series of other things. They actually created a sort of a crypto bank law, which allows you to have a banking institution that can hold custody of cryptocurrency and do so in a more lightweight fashion than a traditional bank. So that's sort of the the yin and the yang in the U.S. state regulatory approaches, and others for others the progress has been more limited. So those are really two of the big most active states in the
Okay.
U.S.
I'm surprised you didn't mention California. You would think that they would be sort of all over this, but I guess that's
Yeah, they haven't really. They had an effort to introduce a bill a few times. It was somewhat similar to the New York bit license in terms of being like an all-encompassing cryptocurrency or virtual currency regime, and it hasn't gotten through the legislature the few times it's been introduced. So in that sense, it's been good that California does not subject cryptocurrency to money transmitter laws. So people have been able to go in there with cryptocurrency exchanges and a variety of different blockchain-based businesses with fewer restrictions. So that has been good. Sort of accidentally, it essentially meshes with, basically the Silicon Valley entrepreneurial spirit. But I do believe, sooner or later there will be some sort of regulatory regime in California. I just hope it is not draconian.
sure. So I want to be respectful of your time because I do know you have a limit on this, but I have a couple more questions. So the first one is, will digital ever be a real currency not controlled by nation states? Because the power of the purse is basically, outside of the power of the military, probably the most important aspect of sort of governing a country. So, and I know when Bitcoin was going strong and was going up to $20,000 a coin and whatnot, everybody was saying, well, this is the end of traditional monetary means. And obviously we have not progressed much beyond it still being an asset of some sort. So do you ever see a digital currency not under a nation state's power?
I do, but probably not as the be-all, end-all. What I see is probably an extended phase, maybe going indefinitely, of basically digital currencies and proxies in competition with government currencies. And what we're already seeing is governments issuing the first central bank currencies. Almost every central bank is studying it. China has a pilot program to actually have the currency available in a blockchain-based form to get all the benefits of the blockchain while it's still being a sovereign currency. So I know, China as a surveillance state doesn't endear many people to this notion, but they're not the only ones doing it. Certainly, they're not the only ones studying it, and I think it will come to the fore in the next few years. There's essentially no reason to be restricted to the traditional banking and monetary system architecture. Blockchain is a better way, and a lot can be adopted from it to bring benefits to even to national currencies. So, and what we're seeing is a kind of situation where most are embracing the regulation, or I should say, at least tolerating it and dealing with regulation rather than trying to avoid it. There are shady efforts and they're called privacy coins that are completely private. There's no trail you can trace on the blockchain, but the use of these is pretty limited commercially. So it's sort of its own kind of penalty box, if you will. So you can have those, but you can't do as much with them commercially. So I see that sort of scenario continuing indefinitely, where government has to sort of learn from this and adapt in the crypto world, then, and sort of adapts on the other side, and it becomes an issue or a matter of adopting a certain amount of reasonable control and regulation, and adopting innovation, while not seeking essentially to be completely unrestricted
Sure.
because you lose a lot of benefits of basically interfacing with the rest of society and having large-scale ventures. So that's already going on, and I see that continuing. It's a feedback loop, essentially. Government itself does adapt.
Well, they have to. I mean, certain things, the traditional banks, I mean, JP Morgan issued their own coin. When it comes to the governments, I did have to laugh when Venezuela introduced their own coin pegged to how much oil they produce, but they wouldn't allow anybody access to the ledger, and they controlled the
Right.
whole ledger, and they said how much the coins were worth. I'm pretty sure that fizzled out pretty quick.
Yeah, there was a trust issue there.
Oh, yeah.
Government does have to try to bolster trust as well. So.
Yeah. So last question, and this is one that you could be as expansive on or is it limited to. In your crystal ball, give me a short term, maybe 2 to 3 years, and a long term, let's say 5 to 10 years, path on the crypto movement, assuming no more pandemics or other massive disruptions to people's attention spans or the global economies.
Well, the pandemic is not necessarily something that's even slowing it down. One thing I've seen with clients and beyond is a push for telemedicine, and then that implies you need to handle personal health information in electronic form better. And one thing people want on that front is permission sharing that's secure but allows healthcare providers to
Access.
further access to better increase health.
So I'm gonna interrupt you there. Estonia is doing that, are they not, on the blockchain? I mean, I've read they're kind of my go-to when it comes to sort of universal technology.
They're a good go-to for that. Yeah, I hadn't seen something on the health front, but they've done a number of things, and including the e-residency and a few other things. I think there's a national token, or at least they had proposed it. But I wouldn't be surprised if they were pushing something health blockchain wise.
Granted, they have the population, I believe, of Wyoming. They may be a little bit bigger than Wyoming. So it's a different standard, but still, they could be somebody to be looked to as a potential guide.
Yeah, and a lot of the smaller jurisdictions can be more nimble and experimental. So a lot of them have been the more progressive jurisdictions, sort of as a counterweight to the U.S. in terms of pushing regulatory models for crypto. But yeah, so I mean, to go back to your main question, I do think that in the next few years, you'll see a lot more B2B adoption of different applications of crypto. Blockchain supply chain is one that's already working into implementation practice, and then going into a lot of other areas. Certainly the financial space. I think you'll see a lot more of a melding of traditional and crypto-based financial quicker than people think. And the DeFi space is especially taking off now. So that looks like it's coming to the fore quicker. And then a few more years down the road, I think then you'll start to see more consumer-facing apps, applications, and uses that are really heavily based on blockchain, if not cryptocurrency, but actually are facing consumers in real-world applications. So that's a lot harder to do because a lot of this is, there's a lot of tech involved, and they need to basically simplify it and make it transparent for consumers.
Well, to my point, of my thinking, they have to create essentially a PayPal for the crypto blockchain combination. So instead of based on your credit card, it's got to be as easy as PayPal, and just hit that, log in, and you pay for whatever you want digitally.
Exactly. And then think of, even like a brokerage account version of that as well. So, where you can have your tokenized fractional real estate and, collectible, art, exotic cars or whatnot. So yeah, all that I think is coming in the next few years.
Well, let's leave it at that, because I can guarantee everybody that this is just part one of the conversation, because we will have Aaron back, because I have so many other questions about
Happy to
so
do
many
it.
other aspects of crypto. But again, we have to break these up into sizable chunks that people can swallow easily and whatnot. So Aaron, thank you very much. That was great. We
My
got
pleasure.
through all the initial questions, and then I have the 20 others that we'll use for parts 2 and 3 and whatnot. But if anybody has interest in reaching out to Aaron, he's graciously included links in the descriptions of this video below. So feel free to reach out to him. It's a fascinating topic, and the man knows his stuff. I was going to
Thank
say
you.
something else, but I'm going to try to keep this for the kids. Um, and so thank you again. I want to thank all the visitors who came to watch and enjoy this conversation about crypto. If you enjoyed this video or any of the other videos on the site, please hit the subscribe button with the bell so that you're notified every time a new video goes live. Again, for Aaron Krowne, I am Sean O'Rourke. Be sure to join us next time on Did You Know That? And Aaron, until the next time, you take care.
Seeing you. Thanks again.
All right. See ya.